My name is Nia. I am 34 years old, and on the night of my 10th wedding anniversary, my mother-in-law humiliated me in front of 50 of our most influential guests. She stood up, tapped her crystal glass, and projected my private infertility diagnosis onto the wall of a five-star restaurant. She called me a charity case who could not even give her son an heir. I did not cry. I simply wiped my mouth, stood up, and pulled out a medical file of my own that would destroy her son's entire existence. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who underestimated your worth. Growing up in the rough neighborhoods of South Atlanta, I learned early on that nobody was coming to save me. My childhood was defined by cramped apartments and the constant hum of city buses outside my window. I worked two jobs just to afford community college, eventually earning a scholarship to a prestigious university where I received my degree and built a successful nonprofit organization. That is where I met Andre. Back then, he was a struggling student with big dreams and empty pockets. I loved his ambition. I paid for his undergraduate degree by picking up extra shifts waiting tables, believing we were building an empire together. I poured every ounce of my energy into making sure he succeeded. When we got married, I thought I had found my forever family. But his mother, Vivian, made sure I knew exactly where I stood. Vivian carried herself like old money royalty. She wore expensive pearls, hosted lavish charity galas, and looked down her nose at anyone who did not have a trust fund. To her, I was just a girl from the projects who had somehow tricked her brilliant son into marriage. She never missed an opportunity to remind me of my roots. She would make backhanded compliments about my hair, critique my table manners, and constantly ask when I was going to bless the family with a child to carry on their prestigious legacy. Fast forward to our 10th anniversary. Andre insisted on renting out the entire private dining room of the Belmont, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the white tablecloths and expensive floral arrangements. 50 guests were in attendance, including wealthy investors, local politicians, and members of Vivian's elite social clubs. Andre was in his element, wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo, and working the room, shaking hands and securing investments for his new tech startup. His brother Damon and sister-in-law Chloe sat near the front, whispering and laughing every time they looked in my direction. I should have known something was wrong, but I wanted to believe this night was about celebrating our love and everything we had built. Halfway through the five-course meal, Vivian stood up from her seat at the head of the table. She tapped her silver spoon against her champagne flute, the sharp ringing sound silencing the room. She smoothed down her designer dress and offered a wide, fake smile to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Thank you all for gathering here tonight to celebrate 10 years of marriage between my son Andre and his wife Nia. It is a milestone, certainly, but as a mother, my heart aches for the future of our family." I felt a sudden knot form in my stomach. Andre sat next to me, staring straight ahead, not making eye contact. Vivian gestured to the back of the room, and suddenly the lights dimmed. A projector clicked on, casting a massive image onto the pristine white wall behind our table. I gasped. It was a blown-up copy of a confidential medical document from my gynecologist. The words, "severe endometriosis" and "high probability of infertility" were highlighted in bright yellow marker for everyone to see. The room erupted into shocked whispers. Some guests covered their mouths in horror, while others leaned in to read the private details of my body. Chloe let out a loud, dramatic sigh of fake pity. Damon took a slow sip of his drink, a smug smirk plastered across his face. Vivian turned to look directly at me, her eyes cold and calculating. "We all know Andre comes from a long line of successful, proud men," Vivian announced, her voice echoing through the silent room. "He deserves a woman who can give him an heir, a woman who matches his pedigree. Instead, he has spent 10 years anchored to a charity case from the projects who cannot even fulfill her basic biological duty. Nia, we tried to accept you. We really did. But you are a broken branch on our family tree. It is time you step aside and let my son build a real family." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Andre, expecting my husband of 10 years to jump out of his chair to scream at his mother to defend my honor. Instead, he just looked down at his plate and adjusted his expensive watch. He knew. He had allowed this to happen. He had probably given her the documents from my private desk drawer. A hot wave of humiliation washed over me, threatening to pull me under. But the tears never came. The frightened little girl from the projects was gone. In her place was a woman who had survived far worse than a mean-spirited socialite. I took a deep breath, picked up my linen napkin, and gently dabbed the corners of my mouth. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. The scraping sound echoed loudly against the hardwood floor. Every eye in the room was fixed on me, waiting for me to run away, crying, "Vivian." I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady, "That is quite a speech, but since we are airing out the family laundry tonight, let us make sure the entire basket gets emptied." I walked away from the table and stepped directly into the light of the projector, letting the medical diagnosis wash over my dress. "You talk a lot about your family legacy and pedigree." I continued, making eye contact with the wealthy investors sitting nearby. "You call me a charity case, but what these lovely guests do not know is that your precious old money is nothing but a mountain of credit card debt." I turned back to Vivian, watching the color begin to drain from her face. "I know about the third mortgage on your estate, Vivian. I know about the collection notices you hide in the bottom of your luxury bags. Your entire upper-class lifestyle is a mirage built on loans you cannot afford to pay back." Vivian gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "Shut your mouth," she hissed, dropping the sweet grandmother act completely. I ignored her and turned my attention to my husband, who was now staring at me with wide, panicked eyes. "And you, Andre, the brilliant tech executive, do you want to tell your investors here how you got your start? Because I distinctly remember working double shifts at a diner to pay for your tuition when you were failing out of school. I remember buying the suit you wore to your first interview. I built you from the ground up while your family contributed nothing but complaints." Andre stood up quickly, his face flushed with anger. "Naya, stop talking right now," he demanded, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. "You are making a scene. You are embarrassing yourself." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Embarrassing myself? You let your mother project my private medical history onto a wall, and you think I am the one embarrassing myself." I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out a crisp manila envelope. I had found it 3 days ago, hidden in the glove compartment of Andre's car, but I had been waiting for the right moment to ask him about it. It seemed Vivian had just provided the perfect stage. "You see everyone," I announced, holding the envelope up high. "My mother-in-law is right about one thing. I was diagnosed with a medical condition that makes it difficult to conceive. But it is not impossible. In fact, my doctor told us a year ago that we were perfectly capable of having a child with the right treatments. But month after month, test after test, nothing happened. Vivian blamed me. Andre let her blame me, until I found this." I unclasped the envelope and pulled out the crisp white paper inside. I walked over to the audio-visual table where Damon was sitting, shoved him out of the way, and placed my document directly over Vivian's on the projector glass. The image on the wall shifted instantly. Vivian's cruel display was replaced by a new letterhead from a prominent Atlanta urology clinic. The room leaned in collectively. I read the words out loud, my voice ringing clear and triumphant over the stunned crowd. Patient name Andre Sterling. Diagnosis complete and irreversible sterility. Cause severe childhood illness. Andre cannot have children. He has known this for over a year. The collective gasp from the 50 guests was so loud it sounded like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Chloe dropped her phone onto the floor. Damon stared at the wall in pure shock. Vivian collapsed back into her chair, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. She looked at Andre, her eyes wide with betrayal. "Andre, is this true?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Andre was trembling with rage and humiliation. His perfect image, his masculine pride, the foundation of his entire fake persona, was completely shattered in front of the very people he needed to impress. He looked around the room, seeing the pity and disgust in the eyes of his fraternity brothers and investors. He had no words. He had no defense. The truth was written in bright yellow light right behind him. You let me take the blame, I said, staring at the man I had loved for a decade. You let your mother tear me down day after day, year after year, knowing the whole time that you were the one who was broken. You are a coward, Andre, a small, pathetic coward. The silence was heavy and absolute. I did not wait for a response. I calmly walked back to my seat, picked up my purse, and looked at the family that had tried to destroy me. I reached down, slid my 10-carat diamond wedding ring off my finger, and dropped it into Vivian's half-empty glass of champagne. It sank to the bottom with a quiet clink. "Enjoy your legacy," I said. I turned on my heels and walked out of the private dining room, my head held high, leaving them to drown in the absolute chaos I had just unleashed. I had only taken 3 steps toward the heavy oak doors of the dining room when a hand clamped down on my wrist like a steel vice. The grip was so punishing it sent a shockwave of pain shooting up my arm. Before I could even attempt to pull away, Andre spun me around. His face, usually so perfectly composed for the cameras and his wealthy friends, was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Veins bulged against the stiff white collar of his custom tuxedo. He was sweating heavily, the illusion of his perfect life shattering into a million jagged pieces right in front of his eyes. "You crazy witch!" Andre hissed, his voice trembling with a terrifying blend of panic and fury. "You think you can come in here and embarrass me in front of my investors? You think you can forge a piece of medical paper and destroy my entire life?" I looked down at his hand gripping my wrist, then back up to his eyes. My expression remained entirely blank. "Let go of me, Andre. You are making it much worse for yourself." But he was too far gone. The panicked murmurs of the crowd, the disgusted looks from the venture capitalists he had spent months kissing, up to the absolute silence from his fraternity brothers. It was all too much for his fragile ego to handle. He needed to regain control immediately. He needed to put the girl from the projects back in her designated place. Andre raised his right hand and struck me across the face. The sound of his heavy palm connecting with my cheek cracked through the silent room like a gunshot. The sheer force of the blow snapped my head to the side and sent me stumbling backward. My high heels caught on the edge of the plush dining room carpet, and I dropped my designer clutch just to brace my hands against an empty chair and keep myself from hitting the floor. A collective horrified gasp echoed from the 50 guests. Someone in the back of the room dropped a wine glass, the shattering crystal perfectly mirroring the complete destruction of our 10-year marriage. A sharp metallic taste immediately flooded my mouth. I reached up my trembling fingers, brushing my lower lip, and pulled them away to see a thick smear of bright red blood. My own husband had just violently assaulted me in front of half of the Atlanta elite. "Oh my goodness, Andre," one of the top investors' wives cried out, covering her mouth in absolute horror. "Let us get out of here right now. This is completely unacceptable. We are leaving." Chairs began to scrape aggressively against the hardwood floor as people scrambled to grab their coats and leave. The carefully constructed, flawless facade of the Sterling family was crumbling to dust right before their eyes. But instead of apologizing or showing a single ounce of remorse for striking his wife, Andre puffed out his chest. He stood tall, breathing heavily, trying desperately to look like the dominant alpha male he so badly wanted the world to believe he was. And right on cue, his toxic family rushed in to protect their golden boy. Damon, who had been sitting in stunned silence at the table, suddenly jumped to his feet. He pointed an accusatory finger directly at me. "Do not look at my brother like that," Damon yelled across the room, his voice loud and desperate as he tried to perform damage control for the fleeing investors. "She is lying to all of you. That medical document on the wall is completely fake. She printed it off the internet to ruin his reputation. My brother is a perfectly healthy man. She is just a bitter, barren woman trying to ruin his big night because she is incredibly jealous of his business success." Chloe, never one to miss a golden opportunity to tear me down, chimed in right behind her husband. She stepped out from behind the long table, her cheap sequined dress shimmering under the expensive chandeliers. "She is mentally unstable," Chloe shouted to the crowd aggressively, grabbing the arm of a local politician who was trying to slip out the side door. "Nia has been losing her mind for months because she cannot give Andre a baby. She is trying to extort our family. She is a total fraud." Look at her standing there, she is practically crazy. I stood up straight, completely ignoring the intense throbbing pain radiating across my left cheek. I did not scream back at them. I did not waste my breath defending myself against their pathetic, desperate lies. And most importantly, I did not shed a single tear. I had promised myself a very long time ago that no one in this wicked family would ever have the privilege of seeing me cry. I briefly looked over at Vivian, who was still slumped in her chair at the head of the table, staring at her son in absolute horror. She knew the truth. She knew the medical document on the projector was entirely real, and she now knew her precious son was a violent monster. I turned my calm gaze back to Andre. He stood there, his chest heaving, his fist still tightly clenched at his side. He was waiting for me to break down. He was waiting for me to cower, to beg for forgiveness, to show the weakness he had preyed upon for an entire decade. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my tailored blazer and pulled out a white silk handkerchief. I calmly wiped the blood from my chin, folded the fabric once, and tossed the stained handkerchief right onto the toe of his expensive leather shoe. I will be hearing from my lawyers first thing tomorrow morning. I said, my voice dangerously soft, but carrying perfectly across the rapidly emptying room. And Andre, good luck raising capital for your little startup when word gets around the city that you punch women in the face when they expose your lies. I turned around, pushed open the heavy oak doors with both hands, and walked out into the grand lobby. The restaurant manager stared at me with wide eyes, clearly having heard the loud commotion, but he did not dare step in my way. I kept my head high, my posture perfectly straight, and walked confidently out the front doors of the Belmont. The warm, humid air of the upscale restaurant was instantly replaced by the biting chill of a sudden Atlanta thunderstorm. Rain was coming down in heavy gray sheets bouncing off the pavement and rapidly flooding the city gutters. The young valet rushed forward with a large black umbrella, his face full of genuine concern as he noticed the angry red mark blooming rapidly across my face. "Ma'am, please let me get your car for you," he offered quickly, trying to shield me from the downpour. "Please step back under the awning. You are going to freeze out here." "No, thank you," I replied softly, offering him a small, polite smile. "I am not driving tonight." I walked right past him, stepping directly out from under the shelter and into the pouring rain. The freezing water instantly soaked through my designer blazer, ruining my silk blouse and plastering my dark hair against my face. I walked down the block, moving away from the glaring lights of the restaurant entrance until the chaotic sounds of the dining room faded completely into the white noise of the raging storm. I stopped under a flickering street lamp on the corner of Peachtree Street and let the heavy rain wash over me. The physical pain in my cheek was absolutely nothing compared to the fiery determination igniting deep within my chest. Standing there in the dark, soaking wet and bleeding from the mouth, I was violently pulled back to a memory from 20 years ago. I was 14 years old, standing on the cracked, uneven pavement of the public housing complex where I grew up. It was raining heavily that night, too. I was holding a plastic garbage bag filled with my only clothes, watching a man my mother had trusted speed away in a beat-up sedan, taking all of our rent money and savings with him. I vividly remembered the look of absolute crushing defeat in my mother's eyes, the way she had collapsed onto the concrete front steps, sobbing uncontrollably because a man had broken her spirit and taken away her power. I remembered making a silent vow that exact night, digging my fingernails so hard into my palms that they actually bled. I promised myself that I would never end up like that. I would never let a man control my destiny. I would never let anyone strip me of my dignity, my finances, or my self-worth. I had spent the last 10 years playing the role of the supportive, quiet, obedient wife, constantly suppressing my own fire just to keep Andre warm. I had compromised my own brilliance and ambition to make sure his fragile male ego was never threatened. I had silently endured his mother's endless cruelty just to keep the peace in a family that never truly wanted me. Never again. The slap had not broken me, it had woken me up from a 10-year nightmare. Andre thought he had put me in my place tonight, but all he had actually done was unleash a predator. I reached into my wet pocket and pulled out my cell phone. Miraculously, the screen still lit up brightly despite the heavy rain falling on the glass. My thumb hovered over the keypad. For years I had kept a massive life-altering secret from Andre, from his terrible family, and from the rest of the world. I had built my own life and my own nonprofit from the ground up because I wanted to prove I could do it completely alone. I had actively distanced myself from the one person whose shadow was so large it could swallow the sun. I had wanted a normal life, a normal marriage, a quiet love that was not tainted by billions of dollars and corporate ruthlessness. But normal was gone. Normal was dead on the dining room floor of that restaurant. I scrolled right past the contacts for my lawyer, past my best friends, and tapped a number I had not called in over 6 months. The line rang twice before she picked up. Nia, a woman's voice, answered. The voice was smooth, commanding, and resonated with an intense authority that could freeze an entire boardroom of executives. "It is very late. Is everything all right?" I closed my eyes, letting the cold rain mix with the warm blood still seeping from my cut lip. "Mom," I whispered into the receiver, my voice finally cracking just a fraction. "I was wrong. I was so wrong about everything. Please come get me." There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. The tone instantly shifted from casual curiosity to deadly terrifying seriousness. "Where are you?" "I am standing outside the Belmont on Peachtree Street. He hit me, Mom. Andre hit me." I heard the sharp, furious intake of breath through the speaker, followed immediately by the sound of a heavy chair scraping aggressively against a hardwood floor. "Stay exactly where you are," my mother commanded, her voice turning to pure, uncompromising ice. "Do not speak to anyone. Do not answer his phone calls. I am coming right now." She hung up the phone without another word. I lowered my hand, slipping the device back into my wet pocket. I stood alone under the street lamp, feeling the cold wind whip fiercely through my soaked clothes, but I did not shiver once. I felt more alive and more dangerous than I had in a decade. Less than 10 minutes later, the deep roar of a massive engine cut through the loud sound of the rain. A sleek black Maybach with pitch-black tinted windows turned the corner and glided down the street like a shark cutting through dark water. The luxury vehicle ignored the valet stand, completely pulling right up onto the curb exactly where I stood. The heavy rear door swung open smoothly. The plush leather interior glowed with a soft ambient light. I stepped out of the freezing rain and climbed into the back seat, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. The storm outside was instantly silenced, replaced by the quiet, dangerous hum of absolute power. And as the Maybach pulled away into the night, heading toward my new reality, I knew Andre Sterling's reign was officially over. The morning sun was violently bright when I returned to the sprawling suburban estate I had called home for the last 5 years. I had instructed my mother's driver to drop me off at the end of the cul-de-sac. I did not want Andre or his family seeing the Maybach just yet. Let them continue believing I was nothing but a helpless, broke woman with nowhere to turn. As I walked up the long, manicured driveway, the first thing I noticed was the stark contrast against the perfectly cut green grass. Heavy-duty black garbage bags were strewn carelessly across the front lawn. Some of them had torn open, spilling my tailored business suits, my silk scarves, and my favorite pairs of shoes onto the wet morning dew. It was a pathetic, juvenile display of dominance. Andre was not even brave enough to face me in the daylight. Instead, he had sent his attack dogs to do the dirty work. Standing on the expansive wrap-around porch, sipping from oversized porcelain coffee mugs, were Damon and Chloe. Chloe was wearing a plush cashmere robe that I had actually bought for her last Christmas, her hair perfectly styled as if she had been waiting hours for this exact moment. Damon leaned against the white wooden railing, wearing his typical arrogant smirk and a tailored suit that cost more than his actual accounting skills were worth. "Look who finally decided to show her face!" Chloe called out, her voice cutting through the quiet suburban morning. She took a slow sip of her coffee and leaned over the railing, a look of pure delight dancing in her eyes. "Andre told us you stormed out of the restaurant last night like a stray cat. We were starting to wonder if you had already crawled back to the projects." We even checked the local news to see if you had been arrested for making a scene at the Belmont. I ignored her completely. I calmly walked up the concrete steps, stepping carefully over a garbage bag that contained my winter coats. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my face an unreadable mask of absolute calm. I looked past Chloe and focused entirely on her husband. "Where is Andre?" I asked, my voice steady and devoid of any emotion. Damon chuckled, setting his coffee mug down on a small wicker side table. "My brother is resting, Nia. He had a very stressful evening dealing with your little public meltdown. He is upstairs sleeping, and then he has a very important board meeting to prepare for later this afternoon. He specifically asked Chloe and me to make sure the trash was taken out before he woke up." Damon gestured vaguely toward the black bags littering the lawn. "He wants you off the property before he comes downstairs. He cannot bear to look at you after the disgusting stunts you pulled last night." I kept my eyes locked on Damon. "I am here to pack the rest of my belongings, grab my laptop from the home office, and collect the financial documents for my nonprofit organization. I am leaving. You can tell your brother his little eviction stunt is unnecessary." Damon laughed again, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the brick exterior of the house. He reached inside his suit jacket and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. He slowly descended the wooden porch steps, stopping exactly one step above me so he could physically look down on me. "You are not going into the home office," Nia Damon said, his voice dripping with condescension. "And you are certainly not taking any financial documents. In fact, I went ahead and saved you the trouble of checking your bank balances this morning." He shoved the folded paper aggressively against my chest. I took the crisp white sheet and unfolded it. It was a printed ledger from my personal banking institution alongside the corporate account statement for my educational nonprofit. I stared at the numbers printed in bold black ink. The balance on my personal life savings account money I had meticulously saved for over a decade read exactly zero. The operational fund for my nonprofit, which held the grant money, meant to provide scholarships and school supplies for underprivileged children in South Atlanta, also read zero. "I see you are finally speechless," Damon sneered, crossing his arms over his chest and rocking back on his heels. "As the official family accountant, I have always had access to the master passwords and the internal routing numbers. It is my job to ensure the family assets are properly managed and protected from liabilities. And right now, you are a massive liability, Nia. Andre is on the verge of securing a $50 million investment for his tech startup. He needed to show aggressive capital and pristine liquidity to his investors today. So I simply consolidated your little charity funds and your personal savings into his corporate account. Consider it an early divorce settlement for wasting 10 years of my brother's life." I looked up from the paper, my expression darkening. "You transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars without my authorization," I stated, keeping my voice incredibly low and dangerously quiet. "You drained a federally registered nonprofit account. That is grand larceny, Damon. That is federal wire fraud." Damon rolled his eyes, completely unfazed by the threat. "Oh, please, stop being so dramatic. You and Andre are legally married. In this state, courts view financial assets as community property. Furthermore, if anyone comes asking, I have a signed physical authorization form authorizing the immediate transfer of all operational funds to Andre's holding company. It has your signature right on the bottom line. I practically traced it myself. It looks very authentic, Nia. Who is the bank going to believe? The brilliant, wealthy tech CEO and his certified public accountant brother, or the barren, hysterical woman who just got kicked out of her own house for forging medical documents to embarrass her husband?" I stood there on the steps, holding the piece of paper that represented years of my blood, sweat, and tears. Damon had actually done it. His arrogance had finally blinded him to his own stupidity. He had crossed the line from being a greedy, annoying brother-in-law to a full-blown federal criminal. He had forged my signature to steal money meant for children who grew up just like I did. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought his little accounting tricks made him completely untouchable. He had absolutely no idea that by moving that money across state lines into Andre's corporate servers, he had just triggered the direct jurisdiction of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And he had no idea that my mother's elite forensic accounting team at Vanguard Holdings was already tracking every single digital footprint he had ever left behind. By handing me this printed ledger, Damon had just handed me his own signed confession. Chloe walked down the steps and linked her arm through her husband's, smiling at me with pure, unadulterated malice. She leaned her head against Damon's shoulder, looking at me like I was something she had scraped off the bottom of her shoe. It is really over for you, Nia. You have no money. You have no husband. You have no family to run back to. You are exactly where you started 10 years ago. Absolute zero. So grab your little trash bags off the lawn and start walking. I am sure you can find an Uber pool to take you to the nearest homeless shelter downtown. They probably have a hot meal waiting for you. We will mail you the divorce papers once we finish fumigating the master bedroom to get your cheap perfume out of the curtains. I looked at Chloe's smug, painted face. I looked at Damon's arrogant, triumphant grin. I did not scream at them. I did not cry. I did not threaten to call the police right then and there. I simply smiled. It was a slow, terrifying smile that did not reach my eyes. The sight of it made Chloe's confident expression falter for just a fraction of a second. She shifted uncomfortably on her feet, suddenly unsure of why the broke, defeated woman standing in front of her looked so completely in control. I reached into the pocket of my blazer, pulled out my phone, and opened my encrypted messaging application. I typed a quick single line to my personal attorney, a ruthless corporate litigator who charged $2,000 an hour, and answered only to my mother. Execute phase 1, I typed and hit send. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, carefully folded the forged bank ledger, and tucked it safely inside my jacket. This piece of paper was not a defeat. It was the exact evidence I needed to put Damon in a federal penitentiary for the next 20 years. I turned around and began walking back down the long driveway, completely ignoring the ruined clothes scattered across the lawn. I did not need them anymore. My mother had already arranged a private fitting with a couture designer for the evening. Before I reached the street, I paused and looked back over my shoulder at the two of them standing proudly on the porch of the massive colonial house. They thought they owned the world. They thought they had just conquered me. Enjoy the house, Chloe. I called out, my voice carrying clearly through the crisp morning air. I really hope you like the new landlord. I turned the corner and disappeared from their sight, leaving them standing on the porch, utterly confused and entirely unaware that the ground beneath their feet was already beginning to crumble. I walked away from the house, the morning air crisp and cold against my skin. The black Maybach was waiting exactly 2 blocks down, idling silently by the curb. The driver immediately stepped out and opened the heavy rear door for me. I slid into the luxurious leather interior and let out a long, slow breath. The soundproof cabin instantly blocked out the suburban morning, wrapping me in total silence. "Would you like the radio on, ma'am?" the driver asked, respectfully, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. "Yes, please," I replied, staring out the tinted window as we pulled away from the life I had just destroyed. The driver tapped a screen on the dashboard, and the speakers filled with the energetic voices of Atlanta's most popular morning radio talk show. The host, known for his relentless gossip and controversial interviews, was already mid-sentence. I froze when I heard the guest sitting in the studio with him. It was Andre. "Man, it is just a tragedy," Andre was saying, his voice thick with fake emotion. He sounded like a completely broken man, a devoted husband who had just been deeply wronged. "You think you know someone. You spend 10 years building a life with a woman, trying to give her the world, and then she just snaps." The host chimed in, sounding completely captivated. "So what exactly happened at the anniversary dinner, Andre? The blogs are going crazy this morning. People are saying she threw a drink in your face and attacked your family." Andre let out a heavy, theatrical sigh. "Nia has been struggling with severe mental health issues for the past year. I tried to get her help. My mother tried to get her help, but she refused. Last night, she completely lost her mind. She fabricated these ridiculous medical documents to embarrass me in front of my investors. And to make matters worse, I just found out this morning that she has been cheating on me with one of the contractors for her nonprofit. She even tried to siphon money out of my company to run away with him. I sat in the back of the Maybach, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. The sheer audacity of his lies was breathtaking. He was executing a classic smear campaign, completely reversing the roles of victim and abuser. He was using the very theft Damon had committed to frame me for embezzlement, all while playing the heartbroken, betrayed husband on live radio. My phone began to vibrate violently in my pocket. I pulled it out to find the screen flooded with notifications. Text messages were pouring in from women in my church group, people I had worshipped with every Sunday for 5 years. They were brutal. "We are praying for your soul, Nia, but Pastor Williams has asked that you step down from the youth ministry immediately." How could you do that to Andre? He is such a good man. You need deep psychiatric help. I watched in real time as people I considered my closest friends began unfollowing me on social media, blocking my number and erasing me from their lives, based entirely on a 5-minute radio interview. Andre knew exactly what he was doing. In the affluent circles of Atlanta, perception is absolute reality. He was isolating me systematically, cutting off every single lifeline and support system I had, ensuring that I would have no one to turn to and nowhere to hide. Then a voice note notification popped up from Vivian. I pressed play, holding the phone up to my ear. "Listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful little ghetto trash." Vivian's voice hissed through the speaker, completely devoid of her usual refined Southern charm. "You are going to quietly sign the divorce papers my lawyer sends over this afternoon. You will ask for zero alimony. You will waive all rights to the house and the cars. If you try to fight us, or if you ever show your face near my son again, I will personally make sure the IRS heavily audits your precious little charity. I will leak stories to the press that you have been stealing donation money to fund your lavish lifestyle. I will destroy your reputation so thoroughly that you will not even be able to get a job flipping burgers in this city. Sign the papers, Nia, and crawl back to the gutter where you belong." The voice note ended with a sharp click. I lowered the phone to my lap. A year ago, a threat like that from Vivian would have sent me into a full panic attack. I would have cried, apologized, and begged for a peaceful resolution. But today, listening to her venomous words, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, calculating calm. I did not reply to Vivian. I did not text my church friends to defend my honor. I simply turned my phone off and tossed it onto the empty seat beside me. The Maybach glided smoothly into the private underground parking garage of a luxury high-rise in Midtown Atlanta. The driver escorted me to a private fingerprint-secured elevator that shot up to the top floor without stopping. The stainless steel doors slid open, revealing a sprawling, magnificent penthouse suite. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the entire city skyline. White marble floors gleamed under modern crystal chandeliers, and original pieces of contemporary art hung on the walls. Standing by the massive glass windows looking out over the city she practically owned was my mother. Valerie Sterling was a force of nature. Even in the privacy of her own penthouse, she was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy blue pantsuit, her hair perfectly coiffed, her posture radiating absolute authority. She was a self-made billionaire, the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings, one of the most ruthless and successful venture capital firms on the East Coast. She turned around as I entered the room. Her sharp, calculating eyes immediately locked onto the faint red bruise swelling on my left cheek where Andre had struck me. Her jaw tightened, and for a brief second, the terrifying corporate titan vanished, replaced by a fiercely protective mother. She walked over to the kitchen island, poured a cup of black coffee from a silver French press, and brought it over to me. She handed me the warm mug and gently touched my uninjured cheek. "You should have let me crush that pathetic boy the day you married him," Valerie said, her voice smooth, but carrying a dangerous edge. "I told you his family was nothing but fake money and massive egos." I took a sip of the bitter coffee, letting the heat ground me. I needed to know he loved me for me. "Mom," I replied quietly. "Not for your money. Not for Vanguard. I just wanted a real family." Valerie sighed, stepping back and crossing her arms. Our relationship was complicated, built on a foundation of pain that we had only recently started to repair. When I was 7 years old, my father was working construction, and we were barely surviving in the projects. Valerie had a brilliant mind for finance, but no one on Wall Street would take a poor young black mother seriously. So she made a choice. The hardest, most ruthless choice a mother could make. She packed her bags, left me with my father, and moved to New York to build her empire. She sacrificed being a mother to become a titan. For 20 years, I resented her for abandoning me. I refused to take her money, her connections, or her last name. I built my own life and my own nonprofit because I wanted to prove I did not need the mother who had left me behind. It was not until my father passed away 3 years ago that Valerie and I finally sat down in a room and truly looked at each other. She apologized. She admitted her flaws. We slowly began to rebuild our relationship entirely in secret. I hid Valerie's identity from Andre and everyone else because I was terrified of what the Vanguard billions would do to my marriage. I wanted Andre to look at me and see his equal, his partner, the woman who had built him up from nothing. I knew that if he found out my mother was a billionaire, he would never look at me the same way again. He would only see a giant dollar sign. "You wanted a real family," Valerie said, echoing my thoughts as she walked toward the sleek glass coffee table in the center of the living room. "And instead you got a pack of rabid dogs who bit the hand that fed them for a decade. Are you done playing the victim now, Nia? Are you finally ready to use the power that belongs to you?" I set my coffee mug down on a side table. My gaze hardened as I looked at my mother. "Yes, I am completely done." Valerie smiled. It was a predatory, brilliant smile that made Wall Street executives tremble in their custom suits. She picked up a slim silver iPad from the glass table and walked back over to me. She tapped the screen a few times, pulling up a highly confidential internal document bearing the Vanguard Holdings corporate logo. She handed the iPad to me. I looked down at the glowing screen. It was a comprehensive financial portfolio and an executive summary for a new technology startup. Andre's tech startup just submitted their final application for a $50 million seed grant from my firm early this morning, Valerie said, her voice dripping with dangerous amusement. His entire pitch relies on pristine financial records and his flawless public reputation. He is scheduled to come into my boardroom for the final approval pitch on Thursday. Valerie stepped closer, looking me directly in the eyes. He has no idea who I am. He has no idea that the venture capital firm he is begging for money belongs to the mother of the woman he just assaulted. So what do you want to do with him, sweetie? I looked down at the glowing iPad resting in my hands, tracing the sharp edges of the Vanguard Holdings corporate logo with my thumb. The screen illuminated the dark, quiet space between my mother and me. "I want to let him think he has won," I told Valerie, my voice steady and cold. "I want him to walk into your boardroom believing he is the smartest man in the entire city. I want him to feel completely untouchable, and then I want to watch you tear his entire world apart piece by piece." Valerie smiled, taking the tablet back from my hands. "Consider it done," she said softly. 2 days later, the heavy glass doors of a prestigious downtown law firm swung open as I stepped into the aggressively air-conditioned reception area. The firm was famous in Atlanta for representing high-net-worth individuals in brutal, high-stakes divorce settlements. Andre had hired their most notorious senior partner, a man named Harrison, who was widely known across the state for intimidating spouses into walking away with absolutely nothing. I was instructed to come alone. They thought I could not afford legal representation after Damon drained my bank accounts. They expected me to walk in looking completely defeated, ready to surrender just to make the nightmare stop. Instead, I walked into the glass-walled conference room, wearing a flawless, tailored charcoal suit that Valerie had purchased for me the day before. My hair was pulled back into a sleek professional bun, and I carried a simple leather portfolio. Andre was already sitting at the massive mahogany conference table. He was wearing a brand new bespoke navy blue suit, a gold tie clip catching the harsh overhead lights. He looked like a king holding court in his own personal castle. The bruising on his ego from the restaurant had completely vanished, replaced by a toxic, overflowing arrogance. Sitting next to him was Harrison, a slick, sharply dressed lawyer with a predatory smile and eyes that coldly assessed my worth the moment I walked through the door. "Have a seat," Nia, Andre said, gesturing to the empty leather chair directly across from him. He leaned back, lacing his fingers together behind his head in a display of total dominance. I am glad you decided to be reasonable and show up. I was worried you were going to have another one of your little mental episodes and refuse to cooperate. I pulled out the heavy chair and sat down, placing my hands neatly on the table. I am perfectly fine, Andre. Let us just get this over with. Harrison opened a thick leather briefcase and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents, sliding them across the polished wood toward me. He tapped a gold fountain pen against the thick paper. These are the finalized divorce decrees, the asset division waivers, and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Harrison explained, his tone completely patronizing, as if he were speaking to a slow child. My client is being incredibly generous, considering the severe emotional distress and public humiliation you subjected him to. Harrison continued. Andre is willing to waive his right to sue you for defamation regarding those forged medical records you displayed at your anniversary dinner. In exchange, you will sign this non-disclosure agreement, stating that you will never speak publicly about his medical history, his business practices, or his family ever again. If you violate this agreement, we will bury you in litigation until you cannot afford to buy groceries. I looked at the thick stack of papers. And the asset division, I asked calmly. Andre leaned forward, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. There is no asset division, Nia. You are walking away with exactly what you brought into this marriage. Nothing. Damon already consolidated the corporate accounts, which are entirely protected under my startup structure. Furthermore, the property waiver you are looking at explicitly states that you surrender all claims to the suburban estate. The house stays with me. My mother is already picking out new wallpaper for the guest room. He paused, clearly waiting for me to start crying or begging. When I remained completely silent, he decided to twist the knife a little deeper. You should really just sign the papers, Nia. You heard the radio show, right? The entire city knows you are unstable. My investors are completely on my side. In fact, my company is doing better than ever. I have a massive meeting tomorrow morning with Vanguard Holdings to finalize a $50 million seed grant. Once that money hits my accounts, I am taking this company public. I am going to be one of the wealthiest men in Atlanta. If you try to fight me in court, I will use that wealth to crush you. I will drag this divorce out for years while you sleep on a cot in a homeless shelter. Sign the papers and I will let you walk away with your freedom. I stared at the man I had loved for 10 years. He was so completely consumed by his own greed and his desperate need to feel powerful that he could not even see the massive trap closing around his ankles. He thought the suburban estate was his greatest asset. He thought forcing me out of that house was his ultimate victory. He did not know the truth about the house. 5 years ago, I had noticed strange discrepancies in our tax filings. Small amounts of money were moving strangely between our joint savings and the accounts Damon managed. When I questioned Damon about it, he brushed me off, calling it routine corporate tax maneuvering. I did not trust him. I knew I needed to protect my initial investment in that house, the down payment I had made using my own hard-earned savings before Andre ever made a dime. Without telling anyone in the family, I hired an independent financial advisor. I legally established a private shell company, a blind limited liability corporation registered in Delaware, where corporate ownership is strictly confidential. Then, under the guise of an aggressive tax write-off strategy, I had Damon draft a quitclaim deed. Andre, who notoriously never read boring legal paperwork and always trusted his brother blindly, signed the deed without a second thought. He legally transferred the entire ownership of our sprawling suburban estate directly over to my private LLC. Andre thought he owned the house. Damon thought he managed the house. Vivian thought she was the queen of the house. But on paper, in the eyes of the federal government and the state of Georgia, I was the sole proprietor of the company that owned the property. The house had never belonged to Andre, and the property waiver Harrison had just slid across the table was completely legally void, because Andre could not demand I waive my rights to a property his name was not actually on. I reached out and picked up the heavy gold fountain pen Harrison had provided. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not tell Andre that he was a liar or a thief. I simply flipped to the last page of the thick stack of legal documents, pressed the gold nib against the signature line, and signed my name in smooth, elegant cursive. I flipped to the non-disclosure agreement. I signed that as well. The NDA was entirely useless to him anyway. I was not the one who was going to expose his secrets to the public. My mother was going to do that, and Valerie Sterling had certainly not signed a non-disclosure agreement. Finally, I flipped to the property waiver. I looked at the clause where I supposedly surrendered all my rights to the sprawling colonial estate. I smiled internally, signing the document with a flourish. I stacked the freshly signed papers, neatly squared the edges, and slid them slowly back across the mahogany table toward Harrison. Harrison looked completely stunned. He had clearly prepared for a massive screaming match. He had legal precedents memorized, ready to shout me down and threaten me with financial ruin. He stared at the signed documents as if they were covered in poison, completely bewildered by how easily I had capitulated. Andre looked equally shocked, but his surprise quickly morphed into a bloated, triumphant grin. He let out a loud, mocking laugh, clapping his hands together. "Well, I have to admit, Nia, I am actually surprised," Andre gloated, grabbing the documents from his lawyer to inspect the ink. "I thought you would put up more of a fight. I guess being broke and homeless finally taught you some respect. You finally realize you cannot win against me. You always were a smart girl when you actually listened to reason." I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my tailored suit jacket. I picked up my leather portfolio and tucked it neatly under my arm. I looked down at Andre, observing the smug satisfaction radiating from his face. He thought he had just successfully erased me from his life. He thought he was walking into tomorrow as a completely free, wildly wealthy man. I leaned forward slightly, resting both of my hands on the edge of the polished mahogany table. I lowered my voice, speaking directly to him in a soft, almost conversational whisper. "Good luck at your big meeting tomorrow, Andre. I really hope everything goes perfectly for you." Andre smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Oh, it will. Like I said, I am about to be a very rich man." I tilted my head, offering him a sweet, deadly smile. "Just make sure your books are perfectly clean for Vanguard, Andre. I hear their CEO loves to do surprise audits." Andre let out another loud, dismissive laugh, waving his hand at me, as if swatting away an annoying insect. He completely ignored the warning, entirely unaware of the massive steel jaws of the trap that had just snapped shut around his neck. I turned around and walked out of the conference room, the sharp click of my heels echoing off the glass walls. I left Andre sitting there in his bespoke suit, clutching worthless legal documents, bragging about a future that was already completely destroyed. The next morning at 9 o'clock sharp, the atmosphere inside the downtown Atlanta headquarters of Andre's tech startup was absolutely electric. The office space was a masterclass in artificial success. Andre had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of stolen investor capital to lease the top floor of a premium glass high-rise. The space featured exposed brick walls, imported Italian espresso machines, and minimalist white leather furniture designed to make him look like the next massive visionary in the financial technology sector. Inside the main glass-walled boardroom, the entire board of directors was gathered around a massive marble table. Andre was pacing back and forth at the head of the room, practicing his final pitch. He wore the same custom-tailored navy blue suit from the lawyer's office, radiating an almost intoxicating level of false confidence. He adjusted his gold tie clip and flashed a brilliant, practiced smile at the board members. "Gentlemen, this is the day everything changes," Andre announced, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "In exactly 2 hours, we will be walking into the regional offices of Vanguard Holdings. They are prepared to offer us a $50 million seed grant. Once that money hits our corporate accounts, we scale up immediately. We take the market by storm, and every single person sitting at this table becomes incredibly wealthy." The board members clapped respectfully, murmuring their approval. Sitting to Andre's right was Damon, his laptop open in front of him. Damon looked significantly less relaxed than his brother. He was sweating slightly rapidly, tapping his fingers against the polished marble table as he reviewed the heavily manipulated financial spreadsheets. Damon had spent the entire night moving numbers around, creating a complex web of fake shell accounts to hide the fact that the company was bleeding money and entirely propped up by the funds he had illegally wire transferred from my nonprofit organization. Just make sure the liquidity charts look flawless, Damon Andre commanded, pointing a finger at his brother. Vanguard is notorious for their strict vetting process. I do not want any red flags when their analysts review our Q3 projections. They are perfectly balanced, Andre Damon replied, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. I encrypted the raw ledgers and buried the source of the recent capital injection behind 3 different corporate firewalls. Nobody is going to find anything. The books look like a masterpiece. As the words left Damon's mouth, the heavy double-glass doors of the boardroom suddenly burst open with a violent crash. The conversation instantly died. Andre froze mid-stride, a look of extreme irritation crossing his face. A young female receptionist was standing in the doorway, looking completely terrified and clutching a clipboard to her chest. "Mr. Sterling, I am so sorry," she stammered, her voice shaking violently. "I tried to tell them they could not come back here without an appointment, but they completely ignored security." Before Andre could even ask who she was talking about, the receptionist was gently but firmly pushed aside. A team of 6 individuals marched into the boardroom. They did not look like tech investors or friendly corporate partners. They moved with terrifying military precision. They were all dressed in immaculate, sharply tailored dark charcoal suits. They carried heavy titanium briefcases and wore completely blank, unreadable expressions. The man leading the group was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiated an aura of absolute authority. He walked directly to the head of the marble table, completely ignoring the stunned board of directors and stepping right past a very confused Andre. He reached inside his breast pocket, pulled out a thick black leather folder, and slapped it down hard onto the center of the table. Vanguard Holdings, Risk Management and Compliance Division. The lead auditor announced, his deep voice easily cutting through the tense silence of the room. "We are initiating a zero-notice, comprehensive forensic audit of all corporate operations' digital assets and financial ledgers effective immediately. Every person in this room is to step away from their electronic devices right now." Andre let out a sharp, uncomfortable laugh, stepping forward and holding up his hands in a placating gesture. "Whoa, wait a minute, friend. There has to be a major misunderstanding here. Our final pitch meeting is scheduled at your regional office in 2 hours. We are fully prepared to hand over all our documents then. You cannot just barge into my private headquarters and disrupt my board meeting." The lead auditor turned his head slowly, fixing Andre with a stare so cold it could have frozen water. "We do not wait for meetings, Mr. Sterling. And we certainly do not wait for you to hand over doctored documents. Step away from the table." Damon suddenly realized exactly what was happening. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He knew that if a team of Vanguard forensic auditors got their hands on his raw hard drive, they would instantly find the federal wire fraud, the forged signatures, and the stolen nonprofit funds. His entire life would be over in a matter of minutes. Panic completely overrode Damon's logic. He lunged forward over the marble table, his hands frantically slamming onto the keyboard of his laptop. He desperately tried to trigger the emergency wipe script he had designed to permanently delete the encrypted folders. His fingers flew across the keys, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He barely managed to type 3 letters before the lead auditor moved with lightning speed. The man reached across the table, grabbed Damon's wrist with crushing force, and violently yanked his hand away from the keyboard. Damon let out a sharp yelp of pain as his arm was twisted backward. Another auditor immediately stepped forward, unplugged the laptop from the wall, and slid a physical hardware lock over the data ports. "You cannot touch my property!" Damon screamed, his voice cracking hysterically as he struggled against the auditor's iron grip. "That is a direct violation of privacy. You have no legal warrant to seize my personal equipment. I am calling the police right now." "You are welcome to call local law enforcement, sir," the lead auditor replied calmly, releasing Damon's wrist and allowing the terrified accountant to stumble backward into his chair. "But it will not matter. The local authorities do not have jurisdiction over federal wire fraud across state lines. Furthermore, your attempt to destroy digital evidence was entirely pointless. We locked you out of your own administrative network at 6 o'clock this morning. We already have completely unencrypted remote backups of every single file, hidden ledger, and deleted email on your server. Damon stared at the auditor, his eyes wide with absolute primal terror. How Damon whispered, his voice barely audible. That server is air-gapped. It is protected by military-grade encryption. How did you get inside my network? Standing in my mother's penthouse the night before, I had actually smiled when Valerie told me the audit team was preparing to breach his system. Damon always believed he was the smartest man in the room. He thought his accounting tricks and cybersecurity protocols were completely impenetrable. But his fatal flaw was his massive, unchecked arrogance. He never paid attention to the quiet, observant woman sitting across from him at the dinner table. Weeks before the anniversary dinner during a Sunday family barbecue at the estate, Damon had been bragging about his new home office server setup. He had left his office door wide open. While Vivian was busy criticizing my potato salad in the kitchen, and Andre was outside drinking beer, I quietly slipped upstairs. I told them I was looking for a lost earring. Instead, I walked right up to Damon's physical network hub, pulled a tiny, perfectly disguised mirroring drive out of my pocket, and plugged it directly into the back of his router. I had learned how to clone a drive years ago when I set up the secure servers for my nonprofit. For 3 weeks, every single keystroke Damon made, every password he typed, and every illegal transfer he authorized was silently copied and beamed directly to a secure cloud folder I controlled. Vanguard did not need to hack his system. I had literally handed them the keys to his entire life. Back in the boardroom, the reality of the situation was finally crashing down on Andre. The smooth, charming CEO facade completely melted away, replaced by the same violent, explosive temper he had shown me at the restaurant. His face turned deep red, and he slammed both of his fists down onto the marble table. "This is an absolute outrage," Andre bellowed, spit flying from his lips as he glared at the team of auditors. "You come into my company, you assault my chief financial officer, and you try to steal my proprietary data. I am Andre Sterling. I am the founder of this company. I have a scheduled meeting with the highest level executives at your firm today. I demand that you step down right now. I demand to speak to the chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings immediately. I am going to have every single one of you fired and blacklisted from the financial industry by the end of the day." The lead auditor did not flinch. He did not look intimidated or impressed by Andre's screaming. Instead, a faint, almost pitying smirk crossed the large man's face. He stepped back from the table, gesturing toward the heavy double-glass doors. "That will not be necessary, Mr. Sterling," the auditor said smoothly. "The CEO is already here." The team of intimidating auditors immediately stepped aside, parting down the middle of the room like the Red Sea. The heavy glass doors swung open once more. The loud, chaotic energy of the boardroom instantly evaporated, replaced by a suffocating, heavy silence. Valerie Sterling walked into the room. She wore a breathtaking, tailored white power suit that radiated absolute dominance and unimaginable wealth. The sharp click of her designer heels against the hardwood floor was the only sound in the dead-silent room. She moved with the slow, measured grace of an apex predator circling a trapped and injured animal. She completely ignored the terrified board members, keeping her piercing, icy gaze locked directly onto Andre. Andre's anger vanished in an instant. His mouth fell slightly open as his brain struggled to process what was happening. He recognized her immediately. He had spent the last 6 months obsessively studying her profile in Forbes magazine, reading her interviews in the Wall Street Journal, and practically worshipping her billion-dollar success story. To Andre, Valerie Sterling was a business god. She was the ultimate key to his future wealth and power. His posture instantly changed. The aggressive, screaming tyrant disappeared, replaced by a fawning, desperate salesman. He quickly smoothed down his tie, forced a wide, charming smile onto his face, and rushed forward to greet her, completely ignoring the fact that her auditors had just seized his entire company. "Ms. Sterling," Andre said, his voice dripping with sudden, artificial respect. "It is an absolute honor to finally meet you in person. I am so sorry for the confusion here today. We are incredibly excited about the Vanguard partnership. Please let me show you to my private office so we can discuss the $50 million investment properly." Valerie stopped exactly 3 feet in front of him. She looked him up and down, her expression one of utter, profound disgust. She did not reach out to shake his extended hand. Andre stood there smiling like a fool, his hand hovering awkwardly in the empty space between them. He thought he was about to charm his way into a massive fortune. He thought his natural charisma was going to save him from the forensic audit. He was so blinded by his own greed and ambition that he had absolutely no idea he was looking directly into the eyes of his own mother-in-law. Valerie stared at his extended hand as if he were offering her a diseased rat. She did not speak. She simply walked right past him, the cool breeze of her movement, the only response to his desperate greeting. Andre lowered his hand, his perfectly rehearsed smile freezing into a tight, confused grimace. Valerie took her place at the head of the massive marble table, placing her designer handbag on the surface with a deliberate, heavy thud. "You can drop the charming visionary act, Mr. Sterling," Valerie commanded, her voice slicing through the tense air of the boardroom like a scalpel. "I am not here for a pitch. I am here to dissect a corpse." She gestured slightly to the lead auditor standing near the wall. "Connect the main display right now." Within seconds, the massive flat-screen monitor mounted on the exposed brick wall flickered to life. Gone were the polished, colorful growth graphs and aggressive revenue projections Andre had spent weeks preparing. Instead, the screen displayed raw, undeniable bank records. Red lines of massive debt and hidden liabilities cascaded down the monitor, alongside high-resolution images of forged signature cards and illegal digital transfer logs. The board of directors leaned forward in their leather chairs, their expressions shifting rapidly from mild confusion to absolute horror. These were wealthy, connected men who had personally invested millions of dollars into what they believed was the next unicorn technology company. Now, they were looking directly at federal evidence of their own impending financial ruin. Valerie began her dissection. Her tone was clinical, detached, and utterly merciless. "Your business plan is a complete work of fiction, Andre. Your user acquisition metrics are artificially inflated by offshore bot farms operating out of Eastern Europe. Your proprietary algorithm, which you claimed was going to revolutionize the global financial sector, is nothing more than licensed open-source code wrapped in an expensive, flashy user interface. Your company produces absolutely nothing of value. You are completely bankrupt." Andre stood frozen in the middle of the room, his face rapidly draining of all color. "Miss Sterling, please," he stammered, taking a hesitant step back toward the table. "Those numbers are taken completely out of context. We are in an aggressive growth phase. We just need a bridge loan to cover the temporary operational deficit." Valerie cut him off with a sharp, echoing snap of her fingers. The massive screen changed again. This time it displayed the exact routing numbers and account balances of my educational nonprofit organization right alongside my personal life savings account. 2 days ago, your chief financial officer illegally accessed secure external accounts and initiated unauthorized wire transfers totaling exactly $840,000. Valerie stated, her icy eyes locking onto Damon, who was physically shaking in his chair. "He forged the signature of your former wife, Nia, to authorize the transfer, and then he washed the stolen money through 3 different shell companies before injecting it directly into your operational fund. Your entire tech startup is currently floating on stolen charity money meant for underprivileged children." The boardroom completely erupted in chaos. The lead investor, an older man with silver hair and deep pockets, slammed his hand violently on the marble table. "You stole money from a children's charity," he yelled at Andre, his face turning purple with rage. "You sat there and told us this capital injection was from a private angel investor in Silicon Valley. Do you realize what you have done? You have implicated all of us in a massive federal wire fraud scheme. We are going to lose everything." Andre's carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. The $50 million dream was instantly dead, replaced by the very real, terrifying specter of federal prison. He looked at the angry, shouting board members, then at Valerie's cold, calculating face, and finally at his brother, who was cowering behind his locked laptop. The Sterling family loyalty. The unbreakable bond Vivian always bragged about at her elite social clubs shattered in less than a second when money and prison were put on the line. Andre let out a primal yell and lunged across the marble table. He grabbed Damon by the lapels of his expensive tailored suit and violently hauled his own brother out of his chair. Damon let out a panicked, high-pitched scream as Andre slammed him hard against the heavy glass wall of the boardroom. "What did you do?" Andre roared, his face contorted in absolute murderous rage. "You told me the money was clean. You told me you secured a legitimate bridge loan from a private lender. You stupid, incompetent fool. You ruined everything I built." Damon desperately clawed at his brother's hands, trying to break the suffocating chokehold. "I did it for you," Damon choked out, tears of genuine terror streaming down his face, ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. "You demanded the capital injection. You said we would lose the Vanguard meeting today if the liquidity charts were not completely perfect. You knew exactly what I was doing, Andre. Do not act innocent now. You authorized the backdoor access yourself." "You forged her signature," Andre screamed, shaking his brother violently against the glass, the heavy pain rattling under the impact. "You stole from a registered federal nonprofit. I had absolutely nothing to do with this. I am the CEO. I just trusted my accountant to handle the books. I am completely innocent in this matter. I will testify against you in federal court myself, do you hear me? I will let you rot in a concrete cell for 20 years to save this company." The pathetic display of cowardice was truly stomach-churning to watch. Here were two men who just 48 hours ago had stood proudly on a suburban porch mocking me aggressively, threatening to throw me in a downtown homeless shelter. Now they were tearing each other apart like cornered rats in a sinking ship, completely desperate to save their own skins at any cost. "Enough!" Valerie's voice cracked like a leather whip, instantly silencing the chaotic, violent room. Andre froze instantly. He slowly released his tight grip on his brother's suit jacket. Damon crumpled to the floor, gasping heavily for air and trying to straighten his ruined tie with violently shaking hands. Andre turned slowly back to Valerie, his chest heaving up and down, his eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic pleading that completely stripped him of his dignity. "Ms. Sterling, I swear to you on my actual life I had absolutely no idea he did this," Andre begged, taking a slow step toward her with his hands raised in surrender. "I am a victim here too. My brother went completely rogue. I can fix this right now. I can fire him immediately. I will call the police and have him arrested myself in this very room. Please, I am begging you, do not pull the Vanguard funding. This company is my entire life. If you walk away right now, I am completely destroyed." Valerie watched him beg. She let the heavy, suffocating silence stretch out for a long moment, allowing him to feel the full, agonizing weight of his impending destruction. She walked slowly around the marble table, her designer heels clicking methodically against the floor, until she was standing just inches away from the trembling executive. She looked him up and down, her expression slowly softening into a mask of dangerous, calculated mercy. "I do not care about your brother's pathetic accounting tricks," Andre Valerie said smoothly, her voice dropping to a low, intimate volume that forced everyone in the boardroom to lean in closely. "In my world, aggressive capital acquisition is sometimes necessary to keep a vision alive. I am not a federal law enforcement agent. I am a venture capitalist. I care strictly about returns on my investment. And despite your gross financial incompetence, your company still holds several highly valuable data encryption patents that Vanguard desperately wants in its portfolio." Andre's eyes widened in shock. A tiny, desperate spark of hope suddenly ignited deep within his chest. "You still want to invest," he breathed, completely unable to believe his incredible luck. Valerie nodded slowly, a predatory glint flashing in her eyes. "I am willing to completely ignore the fraud. I will instruct my audit team to bury the digital evidence of your brother's little wire transfer deeply within my private offline servers. I will authorize the immediate release of the $50 million seed grant to save your company and restore your reputation. But I will do it under one very specific, entirely non-negotiable condition." "Anything," Andre said, instantly nodding his head frantically like an obedient dog. "Name your price. Whatever you want, Ms. Sterling, it is yours." Valerie turned gracefully and walked back to the head of the table. She picked up her designer handbag and slipped the expensive leather strap over her shoulder. "I want a massive public display of stability," Valerie announced clearly, ensuring the entire board heard her words. Vanguard Holdings does not invest millions of dollars into men with messy, chaotic public lives. I heard the local radio interview you gave this morning. It was a pathetic, highly emotional display of domestic drama. Institutional investors hate drama, Andre. They love redemption stories. Andre swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. What do you want me to do? You are going to host a massive gala this Saturday night at your private suburban estate to officially celebrate the Vanguard merger, Valerie instructed, her tone, leaving absolutely no room for debate. You will invite your entire board of directors, your college fraternity brothers, your early-stage investors, and the top media outlets in Atlanta. It will be the premier social event of the entire year. Andre nodded eagerly, relief washing over his face. Yes, absolutely. A gala. We can easily do that. I can have the best caterers in the city booked by this afternoon. Valerie held up a single, perfectly manicured finger, instantly stopping his excited rambling. I am not finished. You will host the gala, and you must personally invite your ex-wife, Nia. You will stand on a brightly lit stage in front of every single person in that room, and you will publicly apologize to her for the divorce. You will completely retract your radio statements. You will beg for her forgiveness in front of the entire city. Andre's face fell instantly. He looked as if he had just been brutally punched in the stomach. Invite Naya. But Ms. Sterling, she is completely unhinged right now. She embarrassed me publicly at our anniversary dinner. My entire family hates her. I cannot bring her back into my house after everything that just happened. It would humiliate me beyond repair. Valerie's eyes turned entirely black. Her terrifying corporate persona locked firmly back into place, radiating absolute power. That is my only condition, Mr. Sterling. You want my $50 million to save you from spending the next 2 decades in federal prison. Then you will swallow your massive ego, and you will beg that woman for forgiveness in front of everyone. If she does not forgive you, or if you refuse to invite her, the deal is completely dead. My auditors will immediately hand this entire digital file over to the FBI, and both you and your brother will be in handcuffs by midnight. She did not wait for his answer. She knew he had absolutely no choice. Valerie turned on her heel and walked out of the glass boardroom, her team of intimidating auditors following silently behind her, leaving Andre completely trapped in a nightmare of his own making. The reality of Valerie Sterling's ultimatum crashed down on Andre the moment the heavy glass boardroom doors swung shut. He had exactly 3 days to pull off a miracle. He had to convince the woman he had publicly humiliated, physically assaulted, and financially ruined to stand by his side and play the loving, forgiving wife. For a man whose entire identity was built on absolute control and toxic pride, it was the ultimate humiliation. But the threat of federal prison has a remarkable way of breaking a man's ego. The very next afternoon, I was sitting behind the desk of my small nonprofit office in South Atlanta. I had returned to the building strictly to gather my remaining personal files. The operational accounts were still completely frozen, sitting at zero, though I knew Valerie's team was actively preparing to restore the funds once the trap was fully sprung. The doorbell to the front reception area chimed loudly. I did not look up from my paperwork, assuming it was the mail carrier. A moment later, a massive, obnoxious bouquet of 24 red roses was nervously pushed through the doorway of my office. Andre stepped into the room looking completely out of place in the modest, brightly painted community center. He was trying incredibly hard to project the image of a deeply remorseful, broken man. His shoulders were slumped, his expensive suit looked slightly rumpled, and he had intentionally skipped his morning shave to appear distressed. Nia, he said softly, his voice thick with a perfectly rehearsed sorrow. I know you probably never want to see my face again, but please just give me 5 minutes. I slowly set down my pen. I looked at the massive bouquet of roses, then up at his face. I made sure to let my expression soften just a fraction, projecting the exact image of the hesitant, emotionally exhausted woman he expected to see. What are you doing here, Andre? I asked, my voice intentionally small and guarded. Our lawyers already handled everything. He took a tentative step forward and placed the heavy glass vase on the edge of my desk. He let out a long, shaky sigh and ran a hand over his face. I made a terrible mistake, Nia. I have spent the last 2 days sitting in an empty house realizing what a complete fool I have been. The radio showed the divorce papers the way my family treated you at the anniversary dinner. It was all wrong. I was terrified. I was acting out of pure defense because of my medical diagnosis. I let my mother get into my head, and I took my shame out on the only woman who ever truly loved me. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to laugh directly in his face. His performance was truly Oscar-worthy. If I did not already know about the Vanguard audit, if I did not know that his company was currently being held hostage by my own mother, I might have actually believed his sudden change of heart. "You hit me, Andre," I whispered deliberately, touching my cheek where the faint bruise was finally beginning to fade. "You let your brother steal the money meant for these kids." Andre flinched, playing the role of the guilt-ridden husband perfectly. "I know, and I am going to fix it. I am forcing Damon to return every single penny to your nonprofit by the end of the week. I swear to you, Nia, I am turning over a completely new leaf. I just want to make things right. I want to publicly apologize to you. I am hosting a massive gala this Saturday at the estate to celebrate a new corporate merger. I want you to be my guest of honor. I want to stand up in front of the entire city and tell them how wrong I was and how incredible you are. Please, Nia, let me give you the public apology you deserve." I looked down at my desk, pretending to be deeply conflicted. I let the silence stretch, watching him sweat under the cheap fluorescent lights of my office. He needed this so badly. He was literally vibrating with desperate energy. "Just to hear you apologize?" I asked quietly, looking back up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Yes," Andre replied eagerly, his eyes lighting up with the sudden hope that his manipulation was actually working. "Just come to the gala. Let me clear your name publicly. Let me show you that I can be the man you always deserved." I took a slow, deep breath, playing the part of the forgiving wife to absolute perfection. "Okay, Andre. I will come to the gala, but only for the apology." "Thank you." He breathed out, a massive wave of relief washing over his face. "Thank you, Nia. You will not regret this." He practically ran out of the office, eager to call Valerie's team and confirm that he had secured his prize. He thought he had just played me brilliantly. He had absolutely no idea that he was the mouse enthusiastically building his own trap. While Andre was busy groveling in my office, his mother and sister-in-law were actively celebrating their impending fortune in the most reckless way imaginable. Across town in the ultra-wealthy Buckhead district, Vivian and Chloe were currently holding court inside an exclusive luxury bridal and evening wear boutique. Vivian was seated on a plush velvet sofa sipping a glass of complimentary French champagne, while a seamstress pinned the hem of a breathtaking silver-beaded designer gown. The dress retailed for over $12,000. Chloe was standing in front of a massive gilded mirror, admiring herself in a deep emerald silk dress that cost equally as much. "Just put it all on the platinum card, darling," Vivian instructed the nervous-looking boutique manager, waving her champagne flute dismissively. "The Vanguard deal closes this weekend. We will be paying off these little accounts with pocket change by Monday morning." The manager smiled tightly and processed the card. What Vivian did not tell the manager, and what she certainly did not tell Chloe, was that the platinum card was already pushed to its absolute maximum limit. In fact, Vivian had secretly taken out a massive high-interest loan from a very dangerous private lending group just to keep up her wealthy appearances over the last 6 months. She had used the deed to the suburban estate as collateral for the loan, completely unaware that Andre did not actually own the house. She was banking her entire financial survival and her physical safety on the Vanguard merger going through flawlessly. "Can you believe Andre actually convinced that pathetic girl to show up on Saturday?" Chloe laughed, turning side to side to admire her reflection. "I cannot wait to see what cheap off-the-rack dress she wears. She is probably going to buy something from a department store clearance rack." Vivian let out a sharp, mocking laugh, taking another sip of her champagne. "Let her wear rags. The only reason Andre invited her is to secure the investors. Once the money is safely in his accounts, he can publicly dump her all over again. We are the real royalty of Atlanta, Chloe. This gala is our coronation." We are finally getting rid of the project trash for good. They clinked their crystal glasses together, completely intoxicated by their own toxic delusions. They were spending money that did not exist, celebrating a victory they had not won, and mocking a woman who currently held their entire existence in the palm of her hand. Far removed from the cheap suburban delusions of the Sterling family, the real preparation for the gala was taking place high above the city. The penthouse suite was quiet, the massive floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the sparkling Atlanta skyline. I was standing on a small circular pedestal in the center of the master dressing room. The room was bathed in soft, warm light. I was not wearing an off-the-rack clearance dress. My mother had flown in a private couture designer directly from Paris the moment the gala was confirmed. For the last 2 hours, the designer had been meticulously tailoring a gown that was nothing short of a masterpiece. It was a floor-length, form-fitting creation made of deep midnight blue silk velvet. The fabric absorbed the light, making me look like a living shadow, while thousands of tiny, hand-sewn black Swarovski crystals cascaded down the bodice, catching the light like broken glass. The dress featured a daring, plunging neckline and a dramatic open back that exuded absolute confidence and lethal elegance. It was a $40,000 weapon disguised as evening wear. Valerie stepped into the room holding a velvet jewelry box. She dismissed the designer with a polite nod, and the woman quietly exited the penthouse. Valerie walked up behind me, looking at our reflections side by side in the massive floor-to-ceiling mirror. She reached out and carefully zipped up the back of the heavy velvet gown. The fit was absolutely flawless. It completely transformed me. The exhausted, beaten-down wife who had stood in the rain outside the restaurant was entirely gone. The woman looking back at me in the mirror was a titan. She was the rightful heir to a billion-dollar empire, and she was going to war. Valerie opened the velvet box, revealing a stunning vintage diamond collar necklace. She fastened it around my neck, the heavy, icy stones resting against my collarbone. "Your ex-husband called my office an hour ago," Valerie said softly, resting her hands on my bare shoulders. "He practically begged my assistant to confirm that I would be attending the gala to announce the partnership. He is incredibly proud of himself. He really thinks he managed to manipulate you into saving his company." I stared at my reflection, noting how the diamonds sparkled against my dark skin. The image of Vivian and Chloe laughing at me, the memory of Andre's hand striking my face, and the agonizing betrayal of Damon draining my nonprofit accounts all fueled the cold, steady fire burning in my chest. "They wanted a show," I said, my voice dangerously low and entirely devoid of mercy. "Let us give them a blockbuster." Saturday night descended upon the sprawling estate like a fog of arrogance. Andre had spared absolutely no expense. The driveway was lined with imported sedans. Massive white event tents had been erected across the back lawn, illuminated by crystal lanterns. Valets rushed back and forth, while security guards checked the names of prominent politicians at the front gate. Waiters navigated the dense crowd, carrying trays loaded with champagne. Inside the grand foyer, Vivian was holding court exactly as she had always dreamed. She stood near the sweeping staircase draped in her heavily financed $12,000 silver gown. She was laughing loudly, surrounded by wealthy investor wives. Chloe stood beside her, glowing with unearned superiority in her emerald silk dress. They were intoxicated by the illusion of their impending fortune, blissfully unaware that the guillotine was already being sharpened. At exactly 8 o'clock, the sleek black Maybach glided past the security checkpoint and pulled up to the front entrance. The valet rushed forward to open the heavy rear door. I stepped out into the humid night air. The moment my silver stiletto touched the pavement, the atmosphere began to shift. As I walked up the concrete steps and stepped through the double doors into the foyer, a heavy silence spread outward. The string quartet playing softly in the corner faltered. Conversations abruptly stopped mid-sentence. Champagne flutes paused halfway to people's mouths. Every single eye in the crowded room locked onto me. I was no longer the unassuming wife who kept her head down. I was a vision of absolute power. The midnight blue silk velvet gown hugged my frame perfectly, the thousands of black Swarovski crystals catching the ambient light. The vintage diamond collar necklace rested heavily against my skin, radiating a blinding wealth that eclipsed everything else. I walked with my head held high, my expression an unreadable mask of cold authority. Vivian noticed the sudden silence. She turned around, a condescending remark already loaded on her tongue, but the words completely died in her throat. Her jaw went slack. Chloe actually dropped her small clutch purse onto the hardwood floor. They stared at me as if I were a ghost wearing a king's ransom. But Vivian, driven by years of toxic habit, quickly recovered her composure. Her shock morphed into a bitter glare. She saw an opportunity to humiliate me, to remind me of my place. Vivian flagged down a young woman standing near the bar. The woman was wearing a tight red dress and an enormous diamond pendant necklace. This was Kendra, the mistress Andre had been parading around town. Vivian grabbed Kendra by the arm and marched her toward me, intentionally drawing the attention of nearby journalists. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Vivian announced loudly, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness meant to mask her malice. "I am shocked you had the nerve to walk through those doors, Nia. I see you managed to rent a nice dress for the evening. Did you put it on a payment plan?" Chloe snickered loudly from behind her mother's shoulder. Vivian pulled Kendra forward, ignoring my icy silence. "Since you are here, Nia, I thought it was appropriate that you meet the future of the family. This is Kendra. She is everything Andre has ever wanted in a woman. Beautiful, sophisticated, and capable of giving him the children you never could." Kendra offered a smug smile. She reached up and touched the massive diamond pendant resting on her chest. "Andre bought this for me just yesterday." Kendra bragged, her voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. "He said I deserved to wear something that truly matched my worth. I hope there are no hard feelings." A crowd had now formed around us. People were whispering, waiting for the humiliated ex-wife to burst into tears and run away. I did not shrink back. I looked at Vivian, then slowly shifted my gaze to Kendra. I let my eyes trail deliberately over the flashy red dress, and finally rested my gaze on the massive, sparkling pendant hanging around her neck. I let out a soft, elegant laugh. It was a sound entirely devoid of warmth, echoing clearly through the quiet foyer. "Hard feelings?" I asked, my voice calm and dangerously composed. "Why would I possibly have hard feelings, Kendra? In fact, I actually feel sorry for you." Kendra's smug smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of deep confusion. "Excuse me," she snapped. I took a slow step forward, completely invading her personal space. I pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at the massive stone resting against her collarbone. My mother had taught me how to evaluate rare assets, and I had a flawless eye. "He told you that necklace matches your worth?" I asked smoothly. "Well, he was right. It is completely fake." Kendra gasped, her hand flying up to cover the stone. "That is a lie. Andre bought this at a premium jeweler." I shook my head slowly, offering a smile full of devastating pity. A premium jeweler would never mount a stone with such an obvious cloud inclusion. And the light refraction is entirely wrong. Real diamonds bend light sharply. That stone is scattering light like a cheap disco ball. It is cubic zirconia. He bought it at a mall kiosk on a credit card he cannot afford. Several people in the crowd gasped. A prominent socialite standing nearby leaned in, squinting at Kendra's chest, which only confirmed my assessment. Kendra's face flushed crimson. I turned my attention to Vivian, who was now seething with rage. I looked her up and down, taking in the $12,000 silver gown she had charged to a maxed-out credit card. "And you, Vivian?" I continued, my voice carrying a lethal authority. "You stand in a house you do not own, wearing a dress you cannot afford, trying to intimidate a woman who no longer cares if you exist. You are not old money. You are just old debt. I suggest you enjoy the champagne tonight. It is going to be the last expensive thing you ever drink." Vivian opened her mouth to scream at me, her face contorted in absolute fury. But a sudden burst of microphone feedback echoed through the house, cutting her off. We all turned toward the massive ballroom. At the far end of the room, a brightly lit stage had been set up, flanked by two digital screens displaying the Vanguard Holdings corporate logo. Standing at the center of the stage, gripping the microphone stand, was Andre. He looked terrible. Despite the custom suit, he was sweating profusely. His face was pale and his eyes darted nervously around the massive crowd. He saw me standing in the foyer, and the sheer impact of my appearance hit him like a physical blow. He blinked hard, completely, unable to comprehend that the powerful, radiant woman dripping in diamonds was the same wife he had discarded just days ago. But Andre did not have time to process his shock. The media cameras were already rolling. The investors were waiting. He had a gun to his head, and Valerie Sterling was holding the trigger. "Ladies and gentlemen," Andre stammered into the microphone, his voice lacking all of its usual arrogant boom. His hands were shaking so badly that the microphone rattled against its stand. "Thank you all for coming tonight. We are here to celebrate a massive milestone for my company. Tonight we officially join forces with one of the most powerful financial entities on the East Coast." The crowd clapped politely, waiting for the big reveal. Andre wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. He looked into the crowd, desperately searching for his savior. "I would like to invite the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Holdings to the stage," Andre announced, his voice cracking slightly under the immense pressure. "Please join me in welcoming Ms. Valerie Sterling." The room erupted into applause. Valerie emerged from the VIP section near the front of the stage. She was wearing a razor-sharp tailored black evening suit, looking every inch the ruthless billionaire she was. She walked up the short stairs, her expression unreadable. Andre stepped back, offering her a desperate, pleading smile. He held out the microphone, silently begging her to deliver the $50 million announcement that would save his life. Valerie stepped up to the center of the stage. She took the microphone from his trembling hand. She did not look at him. She did not smile at the cheering crowd. Instead, she stood perfectly still, her posture radiating a terrifying authority. The applause slowly died down, replaced by an uneasy, expectant silence. Valerie raised the microphone to her lips. She looked dead at the crowd, her piercing gaze sweeping across the faces of the wealthy elite, the politicians, and finally locking directly onto me, standing in the back of the room. The execution was about to begin. Valerie held the microphone close, the cold metal catching the glare of the stage lights. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute, heavy with the collective expectation of a $50 million announcement. Andre stood a few feet away from her, a desperate, sweaty smile plastered across his face. He nodded eagerly, silently urging her to speak the words that would save his pathetic life. Instead of looking at him, Valerie raised her free hand and gave a sharp, deliberate nod to the audio-visual technicians stationed at the back of the room. The massive digital screens flanking the stage instantly flickered to life. The crowd murmured in anticipation, waiting to see the sleek, powerful logo of Vanguard Holdings. But the corporate logo never appeared. The screens remained dark for a fraction of a second before flashing into brilliant, high-definition color. It was security camera footage. The timestamp in the bottom right corner clearly indicated it was from exactly 10 days ago. The location was instantly recognizable to anyone who frequented Atlanta's high-end dining scene. It was the private lobby of the Belmont restaurant. The footage was crystal clear. It showed me walking out of the dining room doors completely composed. And then it showed Andre bursting through the doors right behind me. The camera captured everything in brutal, unforgiving detail. It showed him grabbing my wrist with violent bruising force. It showed the terrifying, unhinged rage contorting his face. And then, in front of a ballroom filled with his most important investors, his loyal fraternity brothers, and the very church elders who had condemned me, the video showed Andre raising his heavy hand and striking me viciously across the face. A collective scream of horror ripped through the ballroom. The sound of hundreds of people gasping in unison was deafening. Champagne flutes shattered against the hardwood floor as guests physically recoiled in shock. The illusion of the perfect, charming gentleman was instantly and permanently obliterated. On the screens, the silent footage looped, playing the violent assault over and over again. Every time his hand connected with my cheek, the wealthy crowd flinched. Andre stood frozen on the stage, his mouth hanging open in absolute terror. He looked frantically at the screens, then at the crowd, realizing that the horrific secret he thought he had buried was currently playing on a massive loop for the entire city to see. Valerie finally spoke into the microphone, her voice slicing through the panicked murmurs like a finely sharpened blade. You are all invited here tonight to celebrate the character and the vision of Andre Sterling. Valerie announced, her tone dripping with lethal contempt. You were told a story about a brilliant innovator and a devoted family man who was tragically betrayed by an unstable wife. But institutional investors do not deal in fairy tales. We deal in absolute truth. And the truth is, the man standing on this stage is a violent, manipulative coward. Andre lunged toward the edge of the stage, waving his arms frantically. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking hysterically. "That video is doctored. It is a deep fake. Someone shut those screens down right now." No one moved. The audiovisual technicians, who were actually private contractors hired directly by Vanguard Holdings, completely ignored his desperate commands. Valerie ignored his outburst completely. She signaled the technicians again. The violent security footage vanished instantly, replaced by high-resolution scans of medical documents. On the left side of the screen was the forged infertility diagnosis Vivian had gleefully projected at the anniversary dinner. On the right side was the authentic, verified medical record from the urology clinic, clearly highlighting Andre's name and his irreversible sterility. For years, this man allowed his mother to publicly and privately torture his wife for failing to produce an heir. Valerie continued, her voice echoing powerfully through the silent, horrified room. When his wife finally uncovered the truth, that he was the one who was biologically inadequate, he physically assaulted her to protect his fragile ego. He then went on a popular morning radio show and lied to this entire city, claiming she had suffered a mental breakdown. I watched the crowd from my position near the foyer. I saw the faces of the women from my church group, the same women who had sent me cruel text messages and demanded I step down from the youth ministry. They were staring at the medical documents on the massive screens, their faces pale with profound shame. They had eagerly participated in my public stoning, blindly trusting a man who had orchestrated the entire smear campaign. But Valerie was not finished. She was methodically dismantling every single pillar of Andre's existence, and she was saving the financial execution for last. The screen shifted a third time. The medical documents were replaced by complex, undeniable financial ledgers. Red highlights illuminated massive illegal wire transfers, routing numbers, and forged signature cards. The digital trail of Damon's desperate accounting tricks was laid bare for every financial expert in the room to analyze. "You believe you are standing in the home of a highly successful technology executive," Valerie said, stepping closer to the edge of the stage to address the lead investors directly. "You believe his startup is fully funded and ready to revolutionize the market. You believe the charming lies he fed you during your private golf games and expensive dinners. Look closely at those ledgers, gentlemen. Look at the actual source of his recent capital injections." The silver-haired lead investor pulled a pair of reading glasses from his suit pocket and squinted at the massive screen. He stepped forward, pushing past a waiter to get a better view of the routing numbers. His face instantly drained of blood, replacing his wealthy confidence with pure panic. "My God," the investor whispered loudly, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet, horrified room. "That is a registered educational nonprofit account he stole from a charity." "That is correct," Valerie confirmed, her voice ringing out with absolute authority and sealing their doom. 2 days ago, Andre's chief financial officer, his own brother Damon, used unauthorized backdoor access to drain $840,000 from a charitable fund meant to provide school supplies for underprivileged children. He forged a legal signature, washed the stolen money through 3 separate shell companies, and deposited it directly into the corporate accounts of this tech startup. This entire company is a criminal enterprise. The ballroom immediately descended into absolute chaos. The investors began shouting frantically at each other, pulling out their cell phones to call their aggressive legal teams. The terrifying realization that they had unknowingly tied their own fortunes and their pristine corporate reputations to a massive federal wire fraud scheme sent a wave of sheer panic through the wealthy crowd. Men in expensive tuxedos were practically shoving each other out of the way to get away from the stage. Near the back of the room, Damon realized his life was completely over. The arrogant accountant who had mocked me on the porch suddenly looked like a terrified child. He dropped his expensive cocktail glass, turned around, and tried to sprint toward the catering exit hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain. He did not make it 3 steps before two massive, broad-shouldered security guards in dark suits stepped seamlessly into his path, blocking his escape and grabbing him firmly by the arms. Vivian, who had been strutting around the foyer like royalty just minutes before, collapsed onto a velvet bench near the sweeping staircase. She clutched her chest, her $12,000 silver gown suddenly looking like a very expensive prison uniform. She watched her golden child, the son she had worshipped and protected her entire life, being utterly destroyed in front of the most powerful people in the state. Chloe stood beside her mother, completely paralyzed by shock, her arrogant smirk permanently erased from her face. Andre was entirely unhinged. The sophisticated, charming CEO was gone, replaced by a cornered, desperate animal. His entire reality had shattered in less than 3 minutes. The $50 million deal was officially dead. His pristine public reputation was completely ruined. His wealthy investors were currently fleeing the estate, and he was staring straight down the barrel of a lengthy federal prison sentence. He spun around and glared at Valerie, his eyes wild with absolute fury and profound confusion. He lunged toward her, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger directly at her face. The veins in his neck were bulging as he desperately tried to regain control of a situation that had already buried him alive. "Turn it off!" Andre screamed at the top of his lungs, spit flying from his lips as he aggressively advanced on her. "Cut the power to the stage right now. I demand that you shut those screens down. Why are you doing this to me? You are a venture capitalist. You are supposed to be evaluating my company for a massive financial partnership. What does any of this have to do with my private divorce? What is your sick, twisted obsession with my ex-wife?" The entire ballroom went dead silent, the shouting investors and panicking guests pausing to wait for the billionaire corporate titan to answer the ruined, hysterical man. Valerie did not flinch. She did not back away from his screaming or his aggressive posturing. Instead, she lowered the microphone, slightly adjusting her posture to look directly down at him. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. It was a smile completely devoid of warmth, a lethal expression that promised absolute, uncompromising destruction. Valerie held that lethal smile for a long, agonizing moment, allowing the absolute terror of the situation to completely paralyze the man standing before her. She did not yell. She did not try to shout over his frantic, spit-flying demands. She simply lowered the microphone from her face, turned her back on him, and began walking toward the edge of the brightly lit stage. The heavy silence in the grand ballroom was so profound that the only sound was the sharp, rhythmic clicking of her designer heels against the polished floor. The crowd of elite Atlanta investors, prominent politicians, and wealthy socialites instantly parted for her. They stepped back, creating a wide, clear path down the center of the room. No one dared to speak. No one dared to intervene. They were watching a corporate execution, and they wanted absolutely nothing to do with the condemned man on the stage. I stood near the grand foyer at the back of the room, my posture perfectly straight, in my midnight blue velvet gown. I watched my mother approach. My expression remained an unreadable mask of cold, commanding authority. Andre watched her walk away from him, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically between Valerie's retreating figure and the massive digital screens that were still displaying the undeniable proof of his federal wire fraud. Valerie reached the back of the room. She stopped exactly 1 step in front of me. She reached out and firmly took my hand in hers, intertwining our fingers in a powerful, undeniable display of absolute unity. She raised the microphone back to her lips. She did not look at the panicking crowd. She looked straight down the center aisle, locking her piercing, merciless gaze directly onto Andre, who was now trembling visibly under the harsh stage lights. "My obsession," Andre Valerie commanded, her voice echoing off the high ceilings with terrifying clarity, "is that you put your hands on my flesh and blood. You abused, humiliated, and stole from my only child. Nia is my biological daughter, and she is the sole heir to the entire Vanguard empire." The words struck the ballroom like a physical shockwave. A collective, deafening gasp erupted from the hundreds of guests. The revelation was so massive, so completely incomprehensible to the people who had spent years looking down on me, that several guests actually dropped their champagne glasses. The sound of shattering crystal echoed through the room, perfectly scoring the exact moment the Sterling family delusion was permanently destroyed. But the most spectacular reaction came from the velvet bench near the sweeping staircase. Vivian had spent the last 10 years ruthlessly mocking my background. She had called me a charity case, a broken branch on their family tree, and project trash. She had forced her son to abandon me repeatedly, insisting that I lacked the proper pedigree to elevate their status in Atlanta's high society. She had bankrupted herself, taking out massive high-interest loans from dangerous private lenders just to maintain the illusion of old money. In that single echoing sentence, the full weight of reality crashed down on Vivian. She realized the woman she had tormented for a decade was not a helpless victim from the projects. She was royalty. Vivian realized she had forced her son to throw away a literal billion-dollar dynasty. The sheer magnitude of her colossal mistake, combined with the terrifying certainty of her own impending financial ruin, completely short-circuited her brain. Vivian let out a high-pitched, strangled gasp. Her eyes rolled violently back into her head, and all the strength left her body. She collapsed completely sideways, tumbling off the plush velvet bench and hitting the hardwood floor in a crumpled, pathetic heap of unpaid silver silk. Chloe dropped to her knees beside her mother, her face completely drained of color. The arrogant emerald-wearing sister-in-law began hyperventilating wildly. Her chest heaved as she desperately patted her mother's face, screaming hysterically for someone in the crowd to call a doctor. But no one moved to help them. The wealthy investors and socialites simply took another step back in profound disgust, looking at Vivian and Chloe like they were carrying a highly contagious disease. On the stage, Andre's legs completely gave out. He dropped heavily to his knees, the microphone stand clattering to the hardwood floor beside him. He stared at me, standing next to the billionaire CEO, his eyes wide with a horrific, devastating clarity. The math was actively computing in his panicked brain. He had traded a loyal, brilliant wife, who was destined to inherit billions of dollars, for a cubic zirconia-wearing mistress and a fake tech startup that was currently under active federal investigation. His mother's toxic arrogance had blinded him, and his own fragile, pathetic ego had driven him to destroy the greatest asset he had ever possessed. He had literally held the keys to the kingdom, and he had thrown them away because he was too insecure to admit his own medical shortcomings. Andre scrambled off the edge of the brightly lit stage. He did not walk. He practically crawled, stumbling over discarded napkins and pushing past the disgusted investors who actively turned their backs on him. He rushed down the long center aisle toward me, his bespoke navy suit wrinkled and heavily stained with sweat. He looked nothing like the confident technology executive who had bragged about his wealth just days prior. He looked like a beggar. I looked down at the pathetic weeping man kneeling at my feet. The man who had slapped me so hard my lip bled. The man who had gone on live radio to call me insane and accuse me of infidelity. He was not crying because he had hurt me. He was not apologizing for the physical assault or the emotional abuse. He was crying solely because he had lost the money. He was begging because he had finally realized the true extent of my power. "I still love you," Andre pleaded, clasping his hands together in front of his chest. "I have always loved you, Naya. We can fix this. We can go to marital counseling. I will do whatever you want. Just tell her to stop the audit. Please, baby, tell your mother to release the funds. Do not let them send me to federal prison." I did not feel a single ounce of pity. The remaining shreds of love I had ever harbored for this man had died the moment his hand struck my face at the anniversary dinner. I pulled my hand free from my mother's grasp and took a slow, deliberate step forward. I looked down at him, my expression radiating absolute, unadulterated disgust. "Get off my property," I commanded, my voice cold, hard, and entirely devoid of mercy. Andre blinked up at me through his frantic tears, completely bewildered. He shook his head slowly, his panicked brain entirely unable to process the command. He looked around the grand foyer, gesturing wildly at the sweeping staircase and the crystal chandeliers. "What are you talking about?" Andre stammered, his voice cracking with confusion. Your property. Nia, you signed the divorce papers 2 days ago. You signed the asset division waivers in front of my lawyer. You gave up all your rights to this place. This is my house. I reached into my designer velvet clutch and pulled out a crisp, neatly folded legal document. It was not the worthless property waiver he had forced me to sign. It was the original, highly confidential deed of trust. I unfolded it slowly, holding it up by the edges, so he could clearly see the bold black ink and the official state seals. You really should learn to read the documents your brother puts in front of you, Andre, I said smoothly, my voice carrying clearly to the silent crowd of investors watching our every move. 5 years ago, you signed a quitclaim deed, transferring this entire estate to a private blind trust. You established a limited liability corporation registered in Delaware. Damon told you it was a highly aggressive tax write-off strategy, and you signed it without a second thought because you always let him do your thinking for you. Andre's jaw dropped. He stared at the thick legal paper in my hands, his eyes frantically scanning the paragraphs until he reached the bottom line. But you never bothered to check who actually owned the LLC. I continued tracing my finger over the signature line. Andre stared at the ink. It was my signature. The document clearly established me as the sole owner, the primary shareholder, and the absolute proprietor of the shell company that held the deed to the estate. You never owned this house, Andre, I whispered, leaning down slightly so only he could hear the final devastating nail being driven into his coffin. I did. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, I sold it. Sold it to who? Andre whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. He stared up at me from his knees, his eyes darting frantically around the grand foyer as if the walls of the mansion were already beginning to collapse inward. To a commercial demolition company, I replied, my voice slicing effortlessly through the heavy, suffocating silence of the room. A massive real estate developer in downtown Atlanta has been trying to acquire this exact plot of land for over 2 years to build a new luxury commercial plaza. The house itself is completely worthless to them. They only wanted the acreage. So I signed the final transfer paperwork this morning. They are tearing this entire monument of your toxic ego down to the bare foundation. Andre let out a strangled, pathetic sound that was halfway between a sob and a scream. He clutched at the fabric of his own trousers, his knuckles turning white. No, he gasped, his chest heaving with panic. You cannot do that, Nia. My clothes are upstairs. My expensive watches, my office equipment, my mother's antique furniture. Everything we own is inside this house. You cannot just tear it down. I suggest you start packing very quickly then, I said, smoothly stepping back so my mother and I were entirely out of his desperate reach. The demolition crew is scheduled to arrive bright and early tomorrow morning to begin the preliminary teardown. However, the private security firm I hired to secure the perimeter will be arriving much sooner. You have exactly 1 hour to get your personal belongings out of my house before they forcibly remove you and permanently lock the front gates. The wealthy guests who were still standing in the foyer began to aggressively murmur among themselves. The sheer brutality of my counterattack was stunning to them. They were witnessing the absolute systematic dismantling of a man who had flown too close to the sun. Several prominent politicians and investors immediately turned their backs on the scene, pulling out their cell phones and rushing toward the front doors. They needed to distance themselves from the Sterling family as quickly as humanly possible before the media cameras waiting outside could capture their faces. Andre scrambled to his feet, swaying slightly as if he were heavily intoxicated. He looked around his beautiful, sprawling estate. He looked at the sweeping mahogany staircase, the imported silk rugs, and the massive crystal chandeliers. He had used this house to project an image of undeniable wealth and superiority to the entire city. Now it was nothing more than a ticking time bomb of his own destruction. Before Andre could even attempt to formulate a response, a new sound cut through the tense atmosphere of the gala. It started as a faint, high-pitched wail echoing from the main highway. Within seconds, the sound rapidly multiplied and grew exponentially louder, transforming into a deafening, terrifying roar that shook the tall glass windows of the grand ballroom. It was the unmistakable sound of multiple heavy law enforcement sirens rapidly approaching the estate. Bright flashes of red and blue light began to reflect aggressively off the wet pavement of the long driveway, cutting through the darkness of the suburban night. The screeching of heavy tires echoed across the manicured front lawn as several black unmarked tactical vehicles and local police cruisers slammed on their brakes right in front of the grand entrance. "What is happening?" Chloe shrieked, abandoning her mother on the floor and backing up against the wall in sheer terror. "Who called the police?" My mother Valerie stepped forward, her tailored black evening suit absorbing the flashing red and blue lights pouring through the front windows. "I did not call the local police," Chloe Valerie announced, her voice radiating absolute uncompromising authority. "I called the federal government." The heavy oak front doors of the mansion were violently thrown open. A team of 12 heavily armed federal agents stormed into the grand foyer. They wore dark, tactical windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI emblazoned across their backs. They moved with terrifying speed and precision, instantly fanning out across the room and securing all the exits. The remaining gala guests screamed and scrambled out of their way, pressing themselves flat against the walls to avoid interfering with the federal raid. Damon Valerie said, her voice cutting through the chaotic shouting of the agents. "Vanguard Holdings is not a local Atlanta bank. We are a federally regulated multi-state financial entity with our primary servers located in New York. When you used your computer to illegally access those funds and wire them across state lines into your brother's corporate account, you did not just commit simple theft. You triggered a massive federal wire fraud investigation. You crossed the jurisdiction of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Damon, who was still being loosely held by Vanguard's private security guards near the ballroom exit, let out a blood-curdling scream of pure terror. The reality of a federal prison sentence completely broke his mind. Driven by pure irrational panic, Damon violently shoved one of the security guards backward and made a desperate, pathetic dash for the kitchen doors. He did not even make it 5 feet. 2 massive federal agents lunged forward, closing the distance in a fraction of a second. One agent tackled Damon directly around the waist, lifting him completely off the ground and slamming him brutally onto the polished hardwood floor. The sickening thud of his body hitting the wood echoed loudly through the room. A catering table full of expensive champagne flutes crashed to the ground beside them, showering the struggling accountant in sharp glass and sticky alcohol. "Stop resisting!" the federal agent roared, pressing his heavy knee aggressively into the center of Damon's back. "Put your hands behind your back right now." Damon sobbed hysterically, his face pressed hard against the floorboards. "I did not do it alone," he screamed, tears and champagne mixing on his face. "Andre made me do it. He is the CEO. It was his company. Do not just arrest me, arrest my brother." He knew exactly where the money came from. The agents completely ignored his desperate pleading. They violently wrenched his arms behind his back, and the sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking into place echoed with terrifying finality. They hauled Damon roughly to his feet. His expensive tailored suit was torn, his face was bleeding from a small cut on his forehead, and he was weeping like a terrified child as they marched him aggressively out the front doors and shoved him into the back of a waiting federal vehicle. Andre watched his brother get dragged away, completely paralyzed by fear. An older federal agent wearing a sharp suit walked directly up to Andre and shoved a thick stack of official warrants into his chest. "Andre Sterling," the agent stated coldly, "we are officially freezing all of your corporate and personal assets pending a comprehensive federal investigation into interstate wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. You are ordered to surrender your passport to our field office by tomorrow morning. Do not attempt to leave the state of Georgia." Andre clutched the warrants, his hands shaking so badly he dropped half the papers onto the floor. He was completely ruined. He had no money, no company, no house, and he was squarely in the crosshairs of the federal government. As the FBI agents began sweeping through the house to seize Damon's computers and Andre's corporate files, a low, dramatic groan rose from the floor near the sweeping staircase. Vivian was finally waking up from her dead faint. She fluttered her eyelashes, clutching her chest and looking around the chaotic room in deep confusion. The flashing police lights and the shouting federal agents completely disoriented her. Chloe knelt beside her, weeping uncontrollably and entirely useless in the face of actual adversity. Vivian slowly pushed herself up into a sitting position, her $12,000 silver gown pooling around her on the hardwood floor. Andre, she called out weakly, her voice trembling. Andre, what is happening? Why are the police in our house? Before Andre could even attempt to explain the absolute devastation that had just occurred, two men stepped out from the remaining crowd of guests. They were not federal agents, and they were certainly not wealthy tech investors. They wore sharp, expensive suits, but they carried themselves with a heavy, menacing aura that immediately signaled danger. They were the private high-interest lenders Vivian had secretly invited to the gala to show off her impending Vanguard fortune. The taller of the two men walked directly over to Vivian. He did not offer her a hand to help her up. Instead, he looked down at her with eyes as cold and dead as a shark. "Good evening, Vivian." The man said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that instantly commanded her attention. "We were really enjoying the party. It is a beautiful estate, or at least it was." Vivian stared up at him, her face draining of the little color it had just regained. "Gentlemen," she stammered, her voice shaking violently, "please, there has just been a massive misunderstanding. The Vanguard deal is experiencing a slight delay, but the money is coming. I swear to you, the money is coming." The man let out a short, humorless laugh. He reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out a thick legal folder. He casually dropped it directly into Vivian's lap. "There is no Vanguard deal, Vivian," the man said coldly. "We just watched your son's company get dismantled by the federal government. And we just heard your ex-daughter-in-law announce that this house is being demolished tomorrow morning." Vivian looked down at the legal folder in her lap, as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. "When you took out a $2 million private loan from our organization 6 months ago, you used the deed to this estate as your primary collateral?" The man continued, leaning down slightly, so his menacing face was just inches from hers. "You signed legally binding documents swearing that you and your son held the sole equity in this property, but it turns out you never owned it at all. You committed massive financial fraud against our organization, Vivian. And we do not involve the local police when people steal from us." Vivian began to hyperventilate, her hands flying up to cover her mouth in absolute primal terror. "You have exactly 48 hours to return our $2 million, plus the accumulated interest," the man whispered, his tone completely devoid of mercy. "If that money is not in our designated accounts by Monday morning, we are going to take everything else you value. Have a wonderful evening, ladies." The two men turned around and walked calmly out the front doors, disappearing into the chaotic, flashing lights of the police raid. Vivian was left sitting on the floor of a house she did not own, wearing a dress she could not pay for, completely suffocated by a massive debt to ruthless criminals. The Sterling family had built their entire existence on a foundation of lies, arrogance, and cruelty. And tonight the entire structure had finally collapsed, burying every single one of them alive in the rubble of their own making. I walked out of the grand front doors, leaving the chaos inside behind me. The crisp, cool night air felt incredibly refreshing. As my mother and I stepped into the waiting Maybach, I rolled down the tinted window just enough to watch the final act of the Sterling family tragedy unfold on the sprawling front lawn. Andre was forcibly escorted out of the mansion by two federal agents. He was left standing in the center of the driveway, with absolutely nothing but the sweat-stained suit on his back. A heavy tow truck was already hitching up his leased sports car, while another agent slapped a federal seizure notice directly onto the windshield of his luxury SUV. His corporate bank accounts were completely frozen, and his personal credit cards had already been flagged for fraud. A group of his former investors, the same men who had been eating his expensive catered food just an hour earlier, surrounded him near the front gate. The silver-haired lead investor aggressively shoved his finger into Andre's chest, screaming that his legal team would sue Andre into absolute oblivion by Monday morning. They promised to take every single dime he ever earned for the rest of his miserable life. But the most pathetic sight was his own family. Vivian and Chloe had been unceremoniously escorted out of the house by the private security team. The illusion of their unbreakable family loyalty had completely evaporated. Vivian stood on the manicured grass, her $12,000 dress stained with dirt, screaming hysterically at her son. She violently hit his broad shoulders with her tight fists, sobbing and blaming him for the $2 million debt she now owed to ruthless criminals. Chloe joined in, screeching that Andre had ruined her life and destroyed their family name. The golden boy of Atlanta was now public enemy number one in his own front yard, completely abandoned, bankrupt, and facing federal prison. I rolled the window up, completely shutting out their screaming, and the Maybach pulled away into the night. Fast forward 6 months. The bitter, chaotic cold of that suburban night was entirely replaced by the brilliant, warm sunshine of a late spring morning in downtown Atlanta. I stood on a brightly decorated, raised wooden stage, holding a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors. Behind me stood a massive, newly renovated, state-of-the-art brick building. The bold gold letters above the glass entrance proudly read, "The NIA Foundation for Educational Excellence." I did not use a single penny of Vanguard Holdings money to build this dream. When the federal dust finally settled, Damon confessed to absolutely everything to secure a reduced plea deal. My stolen funds were fully restored with heavy interest, and the aggressive divorce settlement handled by my mother's legal team left Andre entirely stripped of his remaining hidden assets to cover my emotional and financial damages. I took that money, the wealth I had earned with my own blood, sweat, and tears over a decade of hard work, and invested it directly back into my community. Hundreds of people were gathered in the vibrant courtyard. There were local business owners, supportive city council members, and most importantly, dozens of young children from South Atlanta who finally had a safe, technologically advanced space to learn, grow, and build their own limitless futures. I looked to my right. Valerie Sterling was standing beside me, not acting as the terrifying billionaire corporate titan, but simply as my mother. She wore a beautiful yellow sundress, smiling with a genuine, overwhelming pride that no amount of corporate success had ever brought her. We had spent the last 6 months truly healing our fractured past, building a relationship based on deep mutual respect and unbreakable honesty. I stepped up to the wooden podium, looking out at the beautiful sea of faces. The microphone carried my voice loud and clear across the courtyard. For a very long time, I believed my value was tied to my ability to endure pain. I began making eye contact with the young girls sitting in the front row. I thought being a strong woman meant silently carrying the weight of a family that constantly tried to break me down. I allowed people who hated my roots to dictate my future. I hid my brilliance to make a weak man feel powerful. I paused, taking a deep cleansing breath. The air smelled like fresh blooming dogwood trees. But I am here to tell you today that true power has absolutely nothing to do with the family you marry into. It has nothing to do with the expensive zip code you live in, the designer clothes you wear, or the approval of people who are committed to misunderstanding you. True power is waking up every single day and refusing to let anyone dim your light. It is knowing that the blood running through your veins is inherited from generations of resilient, unbreakable women who survived far worse so you could stand here today. To every woman watching this, especially my beautiful Black sisters, who are so often expected to be the mules of the world, hear me clearly. You are not a charity case. You are not a stepping stone for someone else's ego. Do not ever shrink yourself to fit into rooms that are too small to hold your greatness. When they tell you that you do not belong at their table, you do not sit on the floor and beg for scraps. You walk out the door, you build your own table, and you invite the people who actually know your worth to take a seat. I stepped away from the podium, picked up the ceremonial scissors, and cut the thick red ribbon. The crowd erupted into deafening cheers. The sound was pure joy, completely washing away the last lingering ghosts of my past. I am Nia. I am whole. I am completely free. And my story is just beginning. The ultimate lesson from Nia's journey is that your self-worth should never be determined by toxic people who refuse to value you. For years, Nia shrank her brilliance to protect a fragile ego and endured abuse to fit into a family obsessed with superficial status. She proved that true power does not come from marrying into wealth or seeking validation from abusers. It comes from knowing your absolute worth, maintaining your financial independence, and having the courage to walk away from tables where respect is no longer served. Have you ever walked away from a toxic relationship to reclaim your power? Share your story in the comments below and hit subscribe.